right, guys, so I'm going to try to cover as much as I can in a timely fashion. I don't want to have this be more than maybe about half an hour, but I just want to go over some of the challenges that I had with this mix. The big challenge when mixing music like this is trying to have everything sound big all the time. Unfortunately, though, that is practically an impossibility, so you do have to make compromises and sacrifice certain elements of the song for certain sections or certain instruments, right? So the way I went ahead about this is because we do have brass elements and choirs and synthesizers and all that. I kind of decided to make them more of a secondary thing versus the forefront like you would in Flesh God Apocalypse or in Septic Flesh. The elements of drums, guitars, bass, and vocals take center stage, while the rest of the band is more of a secondary background kind of thing. So that was definitely the biggest challenge, was to try to find that balance between those elements in this mix. Now, I'm going to quickly start with my master chain, just so you guys can see what I mixed through the entirety of the songs from start to finish. I have some tape saturation, but I'll ignore that for now. I have a little bit of EQ just giving me a lift on the top and the bottom end here for just a bit of the subs. I have my mastering limiter. I didn't mix through that. This is just so that you guys can hear the same loudness and all that. And this is the secret sauce here. This is my SSL recreation bus compressor, the Brainworks Townhouse, which is their version of it or a recreation of one. You guys can screenshot this. This is the settings that I use practically on almost every mix. The only thing that really changes would be the ratio and the attack. It's always going to be set to auto. So I have a 4:1 ratio and a 10 millisecond attack just to kind of catch a little bit of the snare peaks. And then, of course, I have that auto release. So let's just quickly hear how the mix sounds, and then we'll jump in right into the drums. So I think that was a pretty good section to kind of showcase pretty much all the elements that are going to be running across the song. You had the synthesizers going, and then at the end there, you had the symphonic kind of brass section going on, and then later down the line, there's choirs and stuff. But as you can hear, all of the main instruments were pretty much at the top of everything, being the vocals, the drums, and the guitars and bass and all that. Now, let's go ahead and quickly check out the drums and just kind of hear how they sound isolated here. So here is my drum mix. So tons of ambience. You can really hear that snare kind of just blooming with the reverb. That kick drum has this like kind of thick but really punchy sound. Overall, there's a lot of ambience and tightness going on. So that was the goal with the drums. They kind of have to be punchy enough to cut through all the elements of the mix, but still kind of gel with everything else because it's symphonic death metal. If this was like a more technical death metal track, you know, they would be way more dry and way more forward sounding. These just needed to be a bit punchy and a little bit more ambient. So that being said, let's just dive right into, you know, each element of the mix here. So I got a kick drum, and then I got a kick sample, and then they're all being bussed to one bus here. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the kick. All right. So really punchy, really thick. You can hear tons of low mids in there, which is something that a lot of people I suggest should start experimenting with. But that being said, let's just quickly listen to the kick in mic here. Okay. And then let's hear the kick sample. So actually, you can hear that predominantly that low end thickness and punch is going to be coming from the kick in microphone. Now, I will mention that this is going to be a Superior Drummer 3 that I'm working with, the Death and Darkness kit. So just keep that in mind. All right. So kind of just looking into what I was saying earlier with the low mid thing here. If you look at this band here, I'm dipping out about 250 hertz here for about almost 12 dB. With a very narrow Q. It's an extreme cut, but I just removed it, and you'll guys hear that that low end is not really adding anything that's particularly good, right? And so the kick is sounding a little bit woofy, but if I re-engage that cut there, you'll see that the kick kind of gains a better depth and a lot more clarity here. So a lot of that boxiness has kind of gone away. And, you know, the rest of the stuff I'm doing is just pretty standard moves for me. You know, 8K boost. I'm taking out some mids at around 600 hertz. There was a lot of weird papery sounds there. I'm boosting 60 hertz for about 60 dB, which is a lot of low end. And then I'm compressing it just a little bit here as well. You know, so about a 3-to-1 ratio, fast release and slow attack. I want that kick drum to punch through. Now, this is the secret sauce plugin that I'm using to reintroduce those low mids in a much better way than having them just do that with EQ. I'm going to pop this in and out. Here's the bypass button. So when you see this engage, this orange button means it's bypassed. And then when you see the orange disappear, that means that the plugin is engaged. So orange is bypass, black is engaged. So you can definitely hear it's adding some thickness, and since it's saturation, it's also adding some dynamic control by just kind of bringing down the dynamic range a little bit by there. So that's really it. Now, in regards to the sample here, the sample is really just meant to add a lot of high end, and I'm not really EQing it, actually. There's not much for me to do there. As you can see, it's really mostly just to add a little bit of the upper mids and upper high end there. And I do have everything bussed here. And really, this is something that I have here. It's just some compression just to kind of glue the kick and sample together. And then I have some extra hot upper mids just being added. I felt in the mix that the kick was disappearing just a little bit. Okay, so snare drums, I have 3 different tracks: snare top, snare bottom, and snare sample. This is extremely typical for me. I'm not really going to go over the snare bottom. We're just going to focus on the snare top here. So everything below 100 hertz is being lopped off. I'm boosting a ton of 8K for like 14 dB. I'm boosting a ton of 4K of 7 dB, and then a bunch of 200 for about almost 6 dB. And then I'm using the same compression settings as the kick. So slow attack and fast release. Just you'll see these common themes come up over and over and over again on my drums here. 8K for high end, 4K to 3K for upper mids, and then, you know, slow attack and fast release to add punch via compression. All right, so let's play the snare drum here. I'm gonna go ahead and bypass the EQ right now, and then I'm gonna re-engage it as it's going along, so you guys can hear the difference that EQ is making. It's gonna be pretty drastic, so just take a listen. So guys, do not be afraid to just absolutely change the complete character sound of that snare drum. If I hadn't done that, it's not going to get anywhere near close to what we need it to be in the mix. Let me give you that example right now. And that is with my bottom snare mic and my snare sample completely disengaged. And again, I am bussing all 3 of these to a bus here, and I'm just using some extra EQ here just to filter out some extra stuff that the snare sample was adding. You know, when you add things like this and bust them together, things tend to reaccumulate. And I have some compression as well, just like the kick, where I am trying to glue these 3 elements together as one unit with some compression. And I'm, again, same thing here: slow attack, fast release. I want to add that punch there, and then a little bit of clipping just for making sure that the peaks don't go overboard. All right, moving on to toms. Toms is particularly simple for me. I pretty much just use Fat Filter to cut out the low end, and then I use an SSL channel strip to just boost and cut certain frequencies, very similar to kick and snare. Now, for me, toms lie somewhere in the middle between snare drum and kick drum. You want to reduce the low end and then boost a lot of high end and mids. I'm cutting out the low end like I would in the snare, but then I'm boosting a ton of the high end just like I would do on snare and kick. So again, you'll see that 8K is being selected, and I'm boosting about 9 dB. And then there was some papery sounds that are present almost all the time in toms, around 500 to 1K, and that is also being dipped out. And then again, around 500 itself is also being dipped out. And then I don't really boost low end on my toms. I know some people do, but that's not something that I am particularly fond of doing. And then regards to compression, I am doing a 3-to-1 ratio, slow attack, and fast release yet again. So let's take a quick listen to our tom tracks, and let's hear how that sounds. As you can clearly tell, without any of that EQ, it's really just not working for me. They sound very flat, very two-dimensional. But the moment I add those EQs in there, all of the problems go away, and they actually sound like what metal toms should actually sound like in a metal mix. And then again, my standard operating procedure, I am busing everything to a tom bus here, and then adding a little bit of compression to try to glue all of those elements together. Again, using a more medium style attack with a very fast release, just trying to clamp down a little bit on those transients on the toms there. And then I have some clipping to make sure that the peaks are being kept in check. Now moving on to the drum bus here, I'm gonna just quickly go over it. Not every plugin, but just the main ones here. So we have a SSL bus compressor here, 30 millisecond attack and fastest release. This is standard operating procedure for me. Really, the only things that ever changed is the amount of compression and the ratio. So in this case, since I want my drums to be really intense and punchy sounding, I'm picking a 4:1 ratio. And I'm picking about a 2 dB to 3 dB gain reduction here. Let's go ahead and listen to my drums with the compression, and then I'll turn it on and off as it's going so you guys can hear what the compression's doing. Now, I just want to mention here, really pay attention to the low end when the compressor is engaged. You will hear that the low end kind of just gets tighter and more sucked in, which is what you want. I really like low end that has that kind of forward punch kind of sound to it, and by using this on your bus, it really allows your compression to act as a pseudo low-end controller, which is really, really cool. You can definitely hear it on the kick drum, especially that the low end, once it's engaged, gets very tightened up. When I disengage the compressor, you'll hear the kick drum just was a little bit looser and a little bit more above everything else and not really gelling well with the whole of the drums. Every mix is different, but a lot of the main moves that I just shown you guys is something that I would do across the board a lot, like 80% of the time for a lot of bands. All right, let's jump into Bassland. All right, Bassland. So I got two tracks here. I got a bass DI and a bass amp. Now, and the bass DI is being filtered. So I'm basically doing the split bass technique here, and I'm filtering everything above 400 hertz because I'm just strictly focusing this as low end. And remember, guys, when you're doing this amount of cutting, make sure that it's in linear phase so that you don't mess up anything else when it comes to, phase issues with your tracks here. And then I just copied the bass DI onto this secondary track here and just added some distortion with the Neural DSP Parallax plugin. And then I'm busing it everything to a bass bus and then just treating it as one instrument, really. Okay, so let's just take a quick listen to what my bass sounds like. So that is my preferred way of working with bass guitar, is just having the DI be the strictly the low end and then kind of creating a distortion track for the upper mids and the mid range to kind of have it cut through the mix, okay? So let's quickly just go through each plugin here. Now, this is standard moves for me as well for a lot of metal mixes here. 60 hertz is being cut up so I can make room for my kick drum, and then everything above 4K is being lopped off. I don't need any of that high end from the bass. Bass needs to do bass things. To the actual EQ section here, 1.5K is a classic move for me. I boost that all the time. It is going to be the area of 1K to 2K that is really going to push the bass up in the mix and allow you guys to actually hear it. The low end, you don't really hear on bass more so much that you actually feel it in your speakers and in your headphones and stuff. But because of the nature of the music, you do want some of that growl of the bass to cut through. And that's going to be, again, anywhere between 1K and 2K. So you can see that I'm boosting 1.5K with the bell boost here for quite a bit, about 8 dB. Now, on the opposite end of that, I am cutting around 600 hertz because I felt like there was a little bit too much of that warmer mid-range that I didn't want there. I just wanted more of the uppers from the 1.5. So around 600 hertz is being cut around 3 dB, just to kind of contrast and scoop out a little bit of that, just because I didn't feel I needed it. And then around 75 hertz, 80 hertz or whatever, boosting 4 dB. You know, bass needs some low end boost after I'm boosting so much of that mids. It's going to sound a little lopsided on the upper mids there. So to re-counter that, I am just boosting some of that low end there. So let's go ahead and play you guys the bass. The EQ is bypassed right now, and then I'll re-engage it as it goes along. Tons of that extra upper mids are being added. And if I hadn't added this low boost here at the bottom, it would just sound a lot thinner than it really is. And that's a really important thing. And this is a new plugin in my toolbox. That's something that I replaced maybe 3 other plugins. And what this section is basically a multi-band compressor, and that's compressing everything below 100 hertz. And what I'm doing with this, it's kind of like a fader for just like the sub low end. So everything below 100 hertz with this knob here kind of just gets controlled and compressed. So like I can add more or less sub than as I want in the song as it's going along. And then this enhanced section here is actually just adding some harmonic content, allowing it to translate across smaller speakers. That's really all this is particularly doing. But the most important section is this. And the way I work with this section is really I go ahead and listen to some reference tracks for some kind of low end, and then I'll kind of A/B between my mix and that reference track, and then just kind of raise the slider here until the low end kind of matches near or close to what the reference track is kind of telling me it needs to have. So really, it's nothing crazy. I'm just kind of compressing the low end even further and just creating it as a separate slider here so that I can control the amount of actual sub low end that I need for my entirety track. This slider can be thought as the master fader for the low end for your mix as a whole. And it's really hard to demonstrate that for you guys because I have it already set to go. If you guys want to see how a C4 video is done on that regard, leave a comment below. I can show you guys how I used to do it. And then similar to the kick, I want to add some thickness to the bass as well. So I'm using that saturation to add some low mids back into it. And then I'm following that up with some limiting just to make sure that everything is shaved off. And that is pretty much it with the bass. So let me play you guys the mix, and I'm going to bypass the entirety of the mix chain here and just really pay attention to the low end. And you'll hear that the low end kind of just becomes anemic and not exciting at all. So when I bypassed the chain, I mean, the bass was there, but the bass as a mix as a whole kind of just disappeared a little bit, and it wasn't really doing the job that a bass guitar needs to have, which is to have the power and the glue. So in my mind, the bass is the glue for the entirety of the mix, and that is what the goal is for that. Okay, so now I have my guitars here, and really with guitars, it's pretty simple. I'm not like a crazy guy. It's just a couple plugins, a handful of them. Let's just take a quick listen to what they sound like. So I chose a setup that I wanted to have for these to be a bit more abrasive. It's symphonic death metal, and I wanted to have a bit more of a grindy kind of tone. And then in the mix, they were still a little bit dark, so I started boosting a little bit to kind of get them to where I need them to be. So I'm doing very minor boosting here across 3 different bands. And I'm looking around 8K. Again, you're seeing that come up over and over. 8K is like a classic move for me. I'm boosting about 2.6 dB, 2.5K, which is kind of the upper mids, you know, where a lot of the guitars live essentially. So I wanted to accentuate that, you know, so I'm boosting about 6 dB, which is kind of a lot, but whatever. And I'm boosting about 1.5K. I wanted some of the lower mids because, you know, with these 2 boosts, it was a little bit too harsh. So I needed to kind of balance them out with that 1.5K boost there. No low end boost, none of that. I am cutting out everything below 90 hertz to make room for my kick drum and my bass guitar, obviously. And then everything above 12K is being eliminated because I need to make room for the vocals high end as well as the cymbals. Okay, so let me show you guys what the EQ is going to sound like, guys, because if I show you guys in the context of the band, there's going to be a bit of a massive volume drop. I am doing some volume compensation here, but that's at the later stages here with this limiter here. But it's better if I just show you guys in solo what's happening here so you guys can hear it a little bit better. So here's the EQ off. And then here's the EQ engaged. A massive difference. And you might be thinking that's extreme, but honestly, guys, whatever it takes to get the mix going is what we're going to need to have to do. Moving on to the next plugin is going to be the compressor here, multi-band compressor. It's to control palm mutes. If you guys don't know what that is, I'm not going to go over it. Just type in on YouTube or Google C4 palm mute Andy Sneap trick or whatever, and you guys will get the settings and how to do it. I'm just copying what Andy Sneap did here, and it works perfectly fine. In regards to the EQ, there was some extra stuff that needed to be done here. So I'm removing a little bit of the 500 hertz there. It was a little bit too much for me to handle. And then just kind of like the kind of whistle frequencies around 4 and 5K is what I'm reducing here. This is classic settings. 99% of guitars are getting this kind of treatment nowadays. And let's take a listen to that to see what's going on here. So as you can hear, when I kind of remove the EQ, it kind of sounds a little bit more spiny and whistly, and then a little bit weird in this general region here. But these are the two key moves here. That really kills my ears all the time when I see that happening. So that's pretty much it. And then I needed to add some thickness to them. They did sound a little thin to me with all that extra boosting of the upper mids and stuff. So I'm using saturation to kind of just boost the low mids a little bit and just kind of reintroduce them without EQ, because if I was to do that with EQ, it would sound awful. And so I'm using saturation to kind of get over the limitations of what EQ would do. All right, there's a lot of symphonic elements, guys, and I don't want to waste your time here with what happens with each individual element. But all you guys need to know is that across the board, I am filtering low mids and I am occasionally boosting high end or upper mids. That is pretty much it. Again, look at this. I'm filtering lows. I'm removing low mids. Let's check out another track. I'm removing lows, filtering low mids. And this track may be a little bit different for the content that was available, but as you can see, I am clearly doing almost the same moves. Just the frequency content is changing a little bit, but the same idea is across the board. I'm trying to control low end, remove low mids, and just allow the rest of the other elements as bass, guitar, drums, and vocals to take the predominant space in the mix, and having the symphonic elements just kind of be there as a background thing. And then I am busting all of these to a bus here, and then I'm just kind of just controlling a little bit extra with some EQ. I wanted to add some air, so there's some air being added around 12K for these elements, and that is it. Take a listen to the choirs. So as you can tell, it's non-existent in terms of the low end, and that is exactly the goal again. I don't want low end in there because there's low end enough already as it is, and I just want them to be part of the background mix here. So I'll just play you a little bit of what's happening here. I'm going to bypass all the plugins in the chains here, like all of them, and then you'll hear that like the mix gets really muddy and just kind of like really warpy sounding. So the timbre doesn't change so much as the low end control enhances itself greatly. With vocals, really guys, this is going to be the stars. This is going to be what your gladiators in the ring here. Your vocals need to have the most forward and present sounds in the mix. They're what the casual listener is going to listen to and what they're going to attach themselves to. So the challenge now is that I have all of these elements taking up so much space. How am I going to get the vocals to sit on top of everything else? Well, there's a few strategies that I implemented to do that. So I'm going to just focus on the main vocals and not so much the background vocals. Okay, so starting with my buddy and my good friend Eddie, here's how he sounds with all of the plugins engaged.
Descend into everlasting madness. Leave behind your humanity.
Okay, so tons of compression. You can even hear some distortion happening in there. And it's really, that is what's going to be the key of getting your vocals to up front and in the mix. It's going to be tons of compression and tons of this distortion and saturation to get them up to the mix. Now, I will preface this with the fact that when we were at my friend's studio a couple miles away, we recorded at his studio with a compressor already in the chain. So when I received the tracks via the email, there was already compression from an analog unit already printed on the vocal tracks. And as you're about to see, I am compressing them even more to the living hell because, again, if you can't get your vocals up in front in the mix, you're probably not using enough compression. I guarantee it. Don't be afraid to slam your vocals because vocals need gobs and gobs of compression. You guys will see that numerous times over in future mix walkthroughs or previous mix walkthroughs as well, where I just slam vocals to the living hell, and that is the key to getting them up front and clear in the mix. So let's go step by step here. EQ first. Everything below 100 Hertz is being removed. 12K and above is being removed, making room for the cymbals. I'm boosting a ton of 2K. The vocals had a lot of air with them to begin with, so I didn't feel like I needed to boost very much of the top two bands here, but they needed more mid-range, so I went ahead and did that. So that is really what the EQ is doing. Let me bypass it really quick so you guys can take a listen.
Descend into everlasting madness and your humanity. Into everlasting madness.
So it's just adding mid-range, guys. That's really all it needed to be added. There's a lot of high-end already in there. Moving on to compression, an 1176 compressor, medium attack, fast release. I'm trying to let those transients through, so it sounds like he's attacking the microphone a lot harder than he really is. So let's just check out what the compression is doing. It's an 1176 with a medium attack and fast release. I want to let some of his transients through so it sounds like he's attacking the microphone a lot harder than it really is. And then I want that fast release because I don't want it to clamp down on the subsequent words. I just want him to sound like he's like really barking at that microphone.
Descend into everlasting madness. Descend into everlasting madness. Descend into everlasting madness.
So you can tell that once I bypassed it, a little bit of that intensity kind of went away. It almost sounded like an EQ was turned off. But again, it's just compression, guys. Compression is going to be your best friend on vocals and many, many things, but especially on vocals for having them to cut through that mix and get them just isolated and taken care of and upfront in that mix. And I'm going to showcase this to you guys in a little bit when I play them with the full mix. I hope it was really apparent for you guys. It was definitely apparent for me when the compressor was turned off. The vocals, while they were still up front and present, and they kind of lost a little bit of that intensity. They just didn't sound like Eddie was screaming into the microphone as loudly as he could have and was attacking that microphone as well. So that's pretty much how I would go across and mix the rest of the main vocals. And yeah, I mean, that's really the rest of the mix is that's it. That's how I kind of went about mixing this whole song. Really, really simple. Nothing too crazy. You guys can get great mixes nowadays with just like some EQ chains that are really, really simple. I mean, as you can see, I'm not like doing anything super insane for any of the elements of the mix. I mean, at most, I'm maybe having, I don't know, like fucking 4 or 5 plugins on like the bus channels and like 2 plugins on like the regular channels, you know? So don't be afraid to, you know, experiment and get things done with compression. I really think as more as I mix and get better in my career, that mixing really just comes down to 2 things, which is EQ and compression. And if you can kind of get those 2 down, you guys will be well on your way to getting great mixes at home and without having the need to spend thousands of dollars. So that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed my mix walkthrough, and I hope you guys got some value out of this. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.